The dust kicked up by Jake Morrison's worn boots settled slowly in the late afternoon heat as he approached the weathered porch of the Double Creek Ranch. His horse, faithful mare named Rosie, snorted softly behind him, as tired as he was from 3 days of hard riding across the Texas plains. Jake's calloused hands adjusted his hat brim, shielding his eyes from the golden sun that hung low on the horizon like a promise of endings and new beginnings. He'd heard tell in the last town that Sarah Henderson might be hiring hands for her ranch. What he hadn't expected was the way his heart would stop clean in his chest when she opened that front door. Jake. The word fell from her lips like a prayer she'd forgotten she knew. Sarah Henderson stood frozen in the doorway, her green eyes wide with disbelief. The years had been kind to Hirsch. He was still the most beautiful woman he'd ever laid eyes on, though sorrow had carved gentle lines around those eyes that used to sparkle with nothing but joy. "Hello, Sarah." The voice came out rougher than he'd intended, like gravel on a country road. "Heard you might be needing help with the ranch." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The evening breeze carried the scent of prairie grass and the distant lowing of cattle, but all Jake could focus on was the woman before him, the woman he'd left behind 8 years ago when duty called him to war. "Jake Morrison," she whispered, and he caught the tremor in her voice. "After all these years, you just show up on my doorstep asking for work?" Behind her, small footsteps pattered across wooden floors, and a boy of about 7 appeared at her side. He had Jake's dark hair and his mother's green eyes, and when he looked up at the stranger on their porch, Jake felt the world tilt on its axis. "Mama, who is this man?" the boy asked, tugging on Sarah's worn calico dress. Sarah's hand instinctively moved to rest on her son's shoulder, protective and fierce. When she looked back at Jake, her eyes held a mixture of pain and defiance that cut him deeper than any bullet ever had. This is Jake, Tommy. He's an old friend. The words hung in the air between them like smoke from a dying fire. "You looking for ranch work?" Sarah asked, her voice steadier now, though Jake could see the way her fingers trembled slightly against Tommy's shoulder. "The pay isn't much, and the work's hard. My late husband Jim built this place from nothing, but keeping it running alone, ... She trailed off, lifting her chin with the stubborn pride he remembered so well. "I'm not afraid of hard work," Jake said quietly. "Never have been." "The bunkhouse is empty," she continued as if he hadn't spoken. "Most men don't want to work. For a widow, they think I can't run a ranch properly." Her eyes flashed with familiar fire. "They're wrong. I never doubted that for a second." Something flickered across her face. Surprise, maybe, or the ghost of old affection. "There's just one thing you should know, Jake. If you're planning to stay, if you're planning to work this ranch, ... She paused, glancing down at Tommy, who was watching their conversation with the sharp attention of a child who'd learned early that grown-up words often carried hidden meanings. "What's that?" Jake asked, though something in his chest already knew the answer would change everything. Sarah straightened, her green eyes meeting his with unwavering determination. "The only position available isn't just ranch hand. Tommy needs a father figure, and I won't have a man around here who isn't willing to step into that role. So if you're staying, Jake Morrison, the only position I'm offering is dad." The silence stretched between them like the vast Texas sky, filled with 8 years of unspoken words, broken promises, a love that had never quite died despite everything that had tried to kill it. Jake looked down at the boy, this child, who carried his features in his mother's eyes, and felt something crack open in his chest. All those years of drifting, of running from the memories of what he'd left behind, had led him here, to this moment, to this choice. "The war's been over for 3 years, Sarah said quietly, reading something in his expression. "Where have you been, Jake?" Where had he been? Drinking away the guilt in saloons from California to Colorado, taking whatever work he could find to keep moving, keep running from the letter he'd never sent, the promise he'd broken, the life he'd abandoned when he'd believed it was the right thing to do. "It's trying to become the man I thought you deserved," he said finally. Sarah's laugh was bitter as prairie wind. What man was that? 'Cause the man I deserved wouldn't have left without a word. Wouldn't have let me believe he was dead for 2 years before I married Jim Henderson, out of loneliness and desperation. Tommy looked up at his mother, sensing the tension but not understanding it. "Mama, are you sad?" Sarah immediately softened, running her fingers through her son's hair. "No, sweetheart, Mama's fine." "Why don't you go inside and wash up for supper? I need to talk to Mr. Jake a little longer." The boy nodded and disappeared into the house, but not before casting one more curious glance at the stranger who'd made. His mama's voice sounds so different. "He's a good boy," Jake said, when they were alone. "The best." Sarah's voice held fierce pride. Jim loved him like his own. Never made him feel different or less than. Tommy doesn't even remember that Jim wasn't his real father. The words hit Jake like a physical blow. His real father? "Don't." Sarah's voice was sharp as broken glass. "Don't you dare. You lost the right to that title when you rode away without a backward glance." Jim Henderson raised that boy. Jim was the one who walked the floors when he was teething, who taught him to ride, who held him when he cried after nightmares. "You're nothing to Tommy but a stranger." Jake removed his hat, running his hand through hair that had grown longer than he usually kept it. "You're right. I know you're right. Sarah, if you knew why I left. I don't care why you left." Words came out fierce and final. "Okay, what I care about is that you did. What I care about is that I waited for you for 2 years. Jake. 2 years of checking the horizon every evening, of jumping every time I heard hoofbeats, of believing you'd come back to me like you promised. I wanted to, but you didn't." She turned away from him, gripping the porch railing with white knuckles. "I was 19 years old and pregnant and alone. And you were God knows where, doing God knows what, while I was throwing up every morning and crying myself to sleep every night." The pain in her voice nearly brought him to his knees. "Sarah, please let me explain. Jim Henderson was a good man," she continued as if he hadn't spoken. "He found me working at the general store, barely making enough to feed myself, and he offered to marry me. Not out of love we barely knew each other, but because he said every child deserved a father and every woman deserved protection. He saved us, Jake. He saved us when you couldn't be bothered to." Jake stared at her back, at the rigid line of her shoulders, at the way the evening light caught the gold in her brown hair. "I thought I was protecting you." She whirled around, her eyes blazing. "Protecting me? By abandoning me? And not coming back broken?" The words tore from his throat like they'd been locked away for years. "Do you think I wanted to leave? Do you think there was a single day in that war when I didn't? Think about you, when I didn't want nothing more than to come home to your arms. Then why didn't you?" "Because I wasn't the same man who left." He slammed his hat against his thigh, the sound sharp in the evening air. "Because I'd seen things, done things. Because I'd killed men, Sarah. Boys younger than I was. I'd wake up screaming in the night, and I couldn't stand the thought of you seeing me like that. Of you being afraid of me." Sarah stared at him, and for a moment her anger wavered. "You think I would have cared about any of that? I thought you deserved better than a broken-down soldier who might never be right in the head again. Wasn't your choice to make?" Her voice was quieter now, but no less firm. "I loved you, Jake. All of you. The good and the bad, and whatever the war might have done to you. I would have helped you heal. We could have faced it together. And instead, I gave you nothing but questions and heartache." Yes, the simple word held 8 years of pain. You did. They stood there in the growing twilight, the weight of lost. Years heavy between them. Somewhere in the house, Tommy was probably setting the table for supper, unaware that the stranger on their porch was the father he'd never known. "I can't undo what I did," Jake said finally. "Can't take back the hurt I caused or the years I stole from us. But I'm here now, Sarah, and if you'll let me, I'd like to try to make it right." "Make it right." She shook her head. "You can't just ride back into our lives after 8 years and expect everything to be like it was. I don't expect that. Just ... I want to know my son. I want to help you with this ranch. He said the only position available is Dadwell. Maybe it's time I learned how to fill it." Sarah was quiet for a long time, studying his face in the dying light. "Tommy doesn't know," she said finally, "about you being his father. I told him his daddy was a soldier who died in the war. It seemed kinder than the truth." The words stung. But Jake nodded. "What you told him wasn't far from wrong. The man who left you did die in that war. But maybe there's still time for someone better to take his place. You can't just decide to be his father, Jake. Being a daddy isn't about blood, it's about being there every day. It's about bedtime stories and scraped knees and teaching him right from wrong. It's about putting his needs before your own. Every single time. I know that, do you? Because Jim Henderson knew that. He loved Tommy from the first moment he laid eyes on him. Loved him enough to give him his name, to claim him as his own son. That man never had children of his blood, but he was more of a father to Tommy in 5 years than most men are in a lifetime. Jake felt the weight of those words, the challenge in them. Tell me about him, Jim. Sarah's expression softened, and for the first time since he'd arrived, she looked more sad than angry. He was gentle, kind. He brought me wildflowers every Sunday after church, and he never once made me feel like I was settling for anything less than true love. He deserved better than a woman who was still carrying a torch for a ghost. You loved him, I did. Her voice was quiet but sure. Not the way I loved you. That kind of love only comes once, I think. But I loved him truly and deeply, and when consumption took him last winter, I thought my heart might break all over again. Jake absorbed this, the knowledge that Sarah had found happiness with another man, had built a life and a family that didn't include him. It should have hurt more than it did, but instead he found himself grateful. Grateful that she hadn't spent her whole life waiting for a man who might never come home. I'm glad, he said, and meant it. I'm glad you found love again. Glad you weren't alone. Sarah looked surprised. You mean that? I do. I spent a lot of years hating myself for leaving you. But knowing you had Jim, knowing you were happy, ... it helps. I was happy, she said softly. But Jake, even when I was married to Jim, even when I was trying my hardest to be the wife he deserved, there was always a part of my heart that belonged to you, and I hated myself for it. The admission hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they should cross. Sarah, no. She held up her hand. Let me finish. Jim knew. He knew I still loved you, and he never said a word about it. Never made me feel guilty or ashamed. He just loved me anyway, and he loved Tommy like his own. And when he was dying, you know what he said to me? Jake shook his head, not trusting his voice. He said, if Jake ever comes back, don't let pride keep you from giving him a chance. Deserves to know his real father. And you deserve to have the love you never stopped wanting. Jake felt his throat close up. He sounds like a good man. The best. Sarah wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. Which is why this is so hard. Because I feel like I'm betraying his memory just by talking to you. But at the same time, I can't deny that seeing you again, it brings back feelings I thought I'd buried. I never stopped loving you, Jake said quietly. Not for a single day. Don't. Her voice broke slightly. Don't make this harder than it already is. I'm not trying to make anything hard. I'm just trying to tell you the truth. The truth is, we're different people now. 8 years changes everything. You don't know me anymore, Jake. You don't know what I've been through, how I've had to fight. To keep this ranch running, to keep Tommy fed and clothed and safe. You don't know the woman I've become. Then let me learn. He took a step closer, and she didn't back away. Let me stay, Sarah. Let me help with the ranch. Let me get to know Tommy. I'm not asking you to forgive me overnight or to love me like you used to. I'm just asking for a chance to prove that maybe that broken soldier can become the kind of man who deserves to be called Dad. Sarah stared at him for a long moment, and Jake could see the war being fought behind her green eyes. Finally, she sighed. The bunkhouse needs cleaning out. It hasn't been used since Jim got sick, and I had to let the last hired hand go. You'll take your meals in the kitchen with Tommy and me, and you'll pull your weight around here. No special treatment. Because because of what we used to be to each other. Yes, ma'am. And Jake. She looked at him sternly. If you hurt that boy, if you let him get attached to you and then disappear again, I'll run you off this ranch myself. I won't have Tommy's heart broken by a father who can't stay. I'm not going anywhere, Jake said with quiet certainty. Not again. Sarah nodded slowly. We'll see. Tommy and I eat at 6. Don't be late. She turned to go inside, then paused at the door. One more thing. As far as Tommy knows, you're just a ranch hand who needs work. When and if he learns the truth about who you are, That'll be my decision to make. Understood? Understood. She disappeared into the house, leaving Jake alone on the porch as full darkness settled over the Texas plains. He stood there for a moment, breathing in the night air and trying to process everything that had just happened. Then he walked back to his horse, gathering his few belongings and heading toward the dark outline of the bunkhouse. The next few weeks fell into a rhythm that was both foreign and familiar. Jake threw himself into ranch work with the dedication of a man trying to prove himself worthy of a second chance. He mended fences, herded cattle, repaired the barn roof, and gradually brought the Double Creek Ranch back to the level of operation it had enjoyed in Jim Henderson's day. Tommy watched him with the curious eyes of a child who'd never had a consistent male presence in his life. At first, the boy was shy, hovering at the edges of conversations and darting away whenever Jake tried to engage him directly. But slowly, carefully, Jake began to win him over. It started with small things. Jake carved Tommy a wooden whistle while sitting on the porch after supper one evening. He showed the boy how to properly care for the horses, how to read weather, signs in the sky, how to skip stones across the creek that gave the ranch its name. Each shared moment felt precious to Jake, like a gift he'd never dared hope to receive. Sarah watched these interactions with careful eyes. When Jake could see her internal struggle playing out in the set of her shoulders, the way she'd smile when Tommy laughed at something Jake said, then immediately looked guilty for smiling. One evening, about 3 weeks after Jake's arrival, disaster struck. A late-season storm rolled in with unusual fury, bringing with it hail, the size of robin's eggs, and winds that threatened to tear the roof clean off the house. Jake was in the barn securing the horses when he heard Sarah scream from the direction of the house. He ran through the driving rain to find her standing in the doorway, her face white with terror. "Tommy," she shouted over the howling wind. "You went to check on the chickens when the storm started? It was 20 minutes ago." Without a word, Jake grabbed a lantern and headed into the storm. The chicken coop was 100 yards from the house, but in the driving rain and darkness, it might as well have been 100 miles. He called Tommy's name over and over, his voice swallowed by the wind. He found the boy huddled behind the overturned chicken coop, bleeding from a cut on his forehead where flying debris had caught him. Tommy was conscious but scared, clutching a terrified hen to his chest. "I couldn't." "Leave Henrietta," Tommy shouted over the storm. "She was too scared." Jake's heart swelled with pride even as he gathered the boy into his arms. "That's all right, son. Let's get you both inside." He carried Tommy through the storm, Sarah meeting them at the door with blankets and tears streaming down her face. As she cleaned the cut on Tommy's head and fussed over him, Jake stood quietly to one side, water dripping from his clothes onto the kitchen floor. "Thank you," Sarah said quietly, when Tommy had been tucked into bed with Henrietta the hen in a basket beside him. "Thank you for bringing him home safe." "You don't need to thank me," Jake said. He caught himself before the word son could escape. "He's a brave boy. Any man would have done the same." Sarah studied his face in the lamplight. "No, Jake, any man wouldn't have. Most men would have waited for the storm to pass." That night, Jake lay awake in the bunkhouse, listening to the wind howl and thinking about the feel of Tommy's small body in his arms. The absolute trust the boy had shown in letting Jake carry him to safety, the first time since the war. Jake felt like maybe he was worth something again. The breakthrough came a few days later. When Tommy approached Jake while he was mending harness in the barn, "Jake." The boy's voice was tentative, like he wasn't sure he should be bothering the adults. "Yeah, partner. Mama says my daddy was a soldier like you." Jake's hand stilled on the leather straps. "Is that so?" She says he was very brave and that he loved me very much, even though he had to go away before I was born. Tommy kicked at the straw on the barn floor. "Sometimes I wish I could have met him." Jake's throat felt tight. "I'm sure he wishes he could have met you too." Do you think, do you think he would have been proud of me for taking care of Henrietta during the storm?" I think Jake said carefully that any father would be proud to have such a brave, kind-hearted son. Tommy beamed at the praise, and Jake felt something shift inside his chest. Some wall he'd built around his heart crumbling just a little more. "Jake, yeah, I'm glad you came to work for us. It's nice having a man around again. Mama smiles more now. That evening, Jake found Sarah sitting on the porch after you and Jim did right by him. He asked me today if you might stay permanently. Sarah's voice was quiet in the evening air. I didn't know what to tell him. What do you want to tell him? She was quiet for a long time. I want to tell him that sometimes adults make mistakes. That sometimes love isn't enough to fix everything that's broken. That sometimes the best thing you can do for someone is let them go, even when it breaks your heart. And sometimes, Jake said gently, the best thing you can do is give them a second chance. Sarah turned to look at him, her green eyes reflecting starlight. Is that what you think this is? Second chance? I think it's whatever you want it to be. I'm scared, Jake. The admission was barely a whisper. I'm scared of letting myself love you again. I'm scared of letting Tommy get too attached. I'm scared that one morning I'll wake up and you'll be gone, and I'll have to explain too. My son, why another father left him. Jake reached across the space between their chairs and gently took her hand. She didn't pull away. I can't promise you that life won't throw us curveballs, he said. Can't promise that we won't face hard times or that I'll never make mistakes. But I can promise you this: I will never leave you again. Not you, not Tommy. Whatever comes, we'll face it together. You can't know that for certain. Yes, I can. He squeezed her hand gently. Because I know what it cost me the first time. I know what 8 years without you feels like, and I'd rather die than live through that again. Sarah's eyes filled. With tears, I want to believe you? Then do. It's not that simple. Maybe it is. Jake turned in his chair to face her fully. Maybe we've been making it more complicated than it needs to be. I love you, Sarah Henderson. I've loved you since we were 17 years old, and you laughed at my terrible jokes behind the church after Sunday service. I loved you when I left. For war, I loved you every day I was gone, and I love you now, sitting here on this porch under these stars. Jake, I love the way you've raised our son to be kind and brave and good. I love how you fought to keep this ranch running on your own. I love that you gave your heart to Jim Henderson when he needed it. And I love that you're brave enough to consider giving it to me again. Tears were flowing freely down her cheeks now. I'm scared. So am I. Jake brought her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. But maybe being scared together is better than being alone. What about Tommy? When do we tell him? You're ready. When you think he's ready. There's no rush, Sarah. I'm not going anywhere. She studied his face for a long moment, searching for something. Whatever she found there seemed to satisfy her, because she smiled the first real smile he'd seen from her since he'd arrived. Jim used to say that love was like tending a garden. It needed patience and care and the right conditions to grow.
Jim.
Sounds like a wise man. He was. Sarah wiped her eyes with her free hand. He also said that sometimes the most beautiful flowers grow in the places where the ground has been broken. Jake felt his heart swell with hope. Maybe we can grow something beautiful here, Sarah. You and me and Tommy. Maybe we can build something. Worth having? Maybe we can. They sat there in comfortable silence, hands linked, watching the stars wheel overhead. In the house behind them, Tommy slept peacefully, dreaming whatever dreams filled the hearts of 7-year-old boys. And for the first time in 8 years, Jake Morrison felt like he was exactly where he belonged. The telling came 3 months later on a Sunday after church. Tommy had been asking more questions about his birth father lately, seeming to sense that there were secrets hovering just beyond his understanding. Sarah had grown more comfortable with Jake's presence, more willing to let him take on the role of father figure, though she still held part of herself back, still protected her heart with the wariness of a woman who'd been abandoned before. We're sitting by the creek, sharing a picnic lunch, when Tommy looked up from the wooden boat. Jake had carved for him and asked the question they'd all been dreading and hoping for. Mama, if my real daddy was a soldier, and Jake was a soldier, too, do you think they might have known each other? Sarah and Jake exchanged glances over the boy's head. This was the moment they'd discussed, planned for, worried about. Sarah took a deep breath. Tommy, sit down here between Jake and me. I need to have a talk. The boy looked between them with wide eyes, sensing the gravity of the moment. He settled himself on the blanket, his boat still clutched in his small hands. Do you remember when I told you that your daddy was a soldier who had to go away before you were born? Tommy nodded solemnly. Well, sweetheart, I didn't tell you the whole truth because I didn't think you were old enough to understand. But you're getting to be such a big boy now, and I think it's time you knew. Sarah reached out and smoothed Tommy's dark hair, so like his father's. Your daddy didn't die in the war, Tommy. He got lost for a while, lost and confused, and hurt in ways. That made him think he couldn't come home. But Mama, I don't understand. Jake cleared his throat gently. What your mama is trying to tell you, son, is that I'm your daddy, your real daddy. Tommy's eyes went wide, darting between Jake and Sarah. You are, I am. Jake's voice was thick with emotion, and I want you to know that leaving you and your mama was the biggest mistake I ever made. I thought I was doing the right thing, but I was wrong. I should have come home to you both. ... But you're here now. I'm here now, Jake confirmed. And if you'll let me, I'd like to be your daddy for real. Not just the man who works on the ranch, but your papa who loves you and will always be here for you. Tommy was quiet for a long moment, processing this information with the serious expression of a child trying to understand adult complexities. Does this mean I can call you Papa instead of Jake? Jake's eyes filled with tears. I'd like that. More than anything in the world. And you won't go away again? Never again, I promise. Tommy suddenly launched himself into Jake's arms, hugging him with the fierce intensity that only children possess. I always wanted a papa, he whispered, against Jake's chest. I mean, I love Daddy Jim, but I always wondered about my real papa. I always wanted a son, exactly like you, Jake whispered back. Holding the boy tight against his heart, Sarah watched this reunion through her own tears. Seeing the missing piece of their family finally click into place, when Tommy pulled back from Jake's embrace, he looked at both his parents with shining eyes. Are you and Mama going to get married like real mamas and papas? The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Jake looked at Sarah with hope and uncertainty warring in his expression. Well, Sarah said slowly. Sarah wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her grown woman's figure, and carried a bouquet of the wildflowers Jake brought her every Sunday. When they exchanged vows, promising to love and honor each other through whatever trials might come, there wasn't a dry eye in the church. Do you, Jake Morrison, take Sarah to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold in sickness and in health? For richer or poorer, for as long as you both shall live? I do, Jake said, his voice strong and clear. I promise to love her, protect her, and never leave her side again. Do you, Sarah Henderson, take Jake to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for as long as you both shall live? Sarah looked into Jake's eyes, seeing in them the boy she'd fallen in love with, the man he'd become, and the future they would build together. I do. I promise to love him, trust him, and build a life with him that honors the love we've always shared. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Jake's kiss was gentle and reverent, full of promises and second chances. The congregation erupted in applause, and Tommy whooped with joy from his place beside them. At the reception in the church fellowship hall, old Mrs. Patterson approached Sarah with tears in her eyes. I remember when you two were young, she said, patting Sarah's hand. Even then, anyone could see you belonged together. I'm so glad you found your way back to each other. So am I, Sarah said, watching Jake dance with Tommy to the fiddler's music. So am I. As the evening wound down and they prepared to head home to the ranch. Their ranch now, Jake pulled Sarah aside. I have something for you, he said, reaching into his jacket pocket. I've been carrying this for 8 years, waiting for the right moment. He pulled out a letter, worn soft from handling, and pressed it into her hands. What is it? The letter I wrote you during the war. What I was too much of a coward to send. Sarah unfolded it carefully, seeing her own name written in Jake's careful script. The paper was creased and faded, but the words were still clear. My dearest Sarah, I write this letter knowing I may never have the courage to send it, but needing to put these words somewhere before they eat me alive from the inside. The war is ending, and soon I'll have to decide whether to come home to you or disappear into the vastness of this country and try to forget the man I was before I learned how to kill. Every night I dream of your smile, of the way you laughed when I proposed to you behind your father's barn, of the promises we made to each other. But I also wake up screaming sometimes, Sarah. I wake up with blood on my hands that I can't wash clean, with the faces of dead boys haunting my dreams. How can I come home to you like this? How can I ask you to love a man who's forgotten how? To be gentle. Asterisk. If I don't come home, please know that it's not because I don't love you. It's because I love you too much to burden you with what I've become. Find a good man, Sarah. Marry him and have children and be happy. Forget about the broken soldier who wasn't.